8:30 in the morning. The doors to the elevator were closing. Jack Winters lunged forward, his resume clutched in one hand, as he watched a woman in an expensive suit struggling with a cart caught in the closing doors. He had exactly 7 minutes to make it to the interview that could change his life. 7 minutes to choose. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Jack Winters' small Brooklyn apartment, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor of the kitchen. At 42, Jack's face carried the weathered lines of a man who had shouldered more than his fair share of life's burdens. His calloused hands moved with practiced efficiency as he flipped pancakes on the griddle, occasionally glancing at the clock hanging above the refrigerator. "Emma! Breakfast in 5 minutes, sweetheart," he called out, his voice carrying down the narrow hallway to his 9-year-old daughter's room. Jack ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair, still damp from his early morning shower. Today was Thursday, another day of fixing leaky pipes and unclogging drains at the Apex Technologies building downtown. Another day of being invisible to the executives and professionals who barely acknowledged his existence. But Jack didn't mind the invisibility. It gave him time to think, to solve problems in his head, to remember the life he once had before Sarah's cancer diagnosis changed everything. Emma bounded into the kitchen, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her backpack already slung over one shoulder. "Dad, can I have chocolate chips on my pancakes? Please." Her eager brown eyes, so much like her mother's, looked up at him hopefully. Jack pretended to consider her request with grave seriousness before breaking into a smile. "Well, since you asked so nicely, and since you finished your math homework early last night." He reached into the cupboard and sprinkled a handful of chocolate chips onto her stack of pancakes, arranging them into a smiley face. "There you go, princess. A balanced breakfast fit for royalty." Emma giggled, sliding onto her chair at their small kitchen table. As she dug into her breakfast, Jack sat down opposite her with his coffee, watching her with a mixture of pride and melancholy. 3 years without Sarah, and every day he still found himself turning to share a moment, a thought, a worry, only to find empty space where she should have been. "Hey Dad, are you still going to try for that computer job?" Emma asked, between bites, chocolate smudging the corner of her mouth. Jack nodded, taking a sip of his black coffee. "I am. I'm picking up an application today during my lunch break. The position doesn't open officially for another month, but I want to get a head start." What he didn't tell Emma was how desperately they needed the salary increase that would come with the software engineering position at Apex Technologies. His current job as a maintenance worker barely covered their rent and expenses, and Emma was growing so fast: new clothes, school supplies, the piano lessons she loved so much. Before Sarah's illness, Jack had been a rising software developer at a promising startup. But when the medical bills started piling up and the demands of Sarah's care grew more intense, he had stepped away from his career to be there for his family. After her death, returning to tech seemed impossible with a grieving 6-year-old who needed stability and attention. So he had taken the first steady job he could find, one with predictable hours that allowed him to be home when Emma returned from school. Jack glanced at the clock again. "Time to go, kiddo. Mrs. Rodriguez will be waiting to walk you to school." He helped Emma clean the chocolate from her face, grabbed his toolbox from beside the door, and together they headed down the 4 flights of stairs to the street below. Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who watched Emma after school until Jack got home, was already waiting by the building entrance. "Good morning, Jack, Emma. Beautiful day, yes?" she said with her warm smile. Jack handed Emma her lunchbox and bent down to kiss the top of her head. "Be good today. I'll see you at 6. Emma threw her arms around his neck in a quick hug. "Good luck with the application, Dad. You're the smartest person ever. They'd be stupid not to hire you." Jack laughed, giving her one last squeeze before straightening up. "From your lips to God's ears, sweetheart." As he watched Emma walk away, chatting animatedly with Mrs. Rodriguez, Jack felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He checked his watch and headed toward the subway that would take him to the gleaming skyscraper where Apex Technologies occupied the top 15 floors. What Emma didn't know, what Jack tried hard not to think about, was that his chances of landing the software engineering position were slim at best. Technology had evolved rapidly in the 3 years he'd been away from the field. The younger developers spoke a language of frameworks and methodologies that sometimes made Jack feel like a relic from another era. But he had been studying at night, after Emma went to bed, teaching himself the new programming languages and tools that dominated the industry. He had to try, for Emma's sake. For the promise he had made to Sarah that he would give their daughter the best life possible. The subway car lurched and swayed as it carried Jack and dozens of other morning commuters toward the heart of the city. He gripped the metal pole, lost in thought, mentally rehearsing what he would say when he requested the application from Human Resources. A notification pinged on his phone, a reminder that Emma had a piano recital next week. He needed to request time off, which meant he'd have to work late several evenings to compensate. Jack sighed, adding it to his mental checklist of responsibilities. The life of a single parent was a constant juggling act, a series of compromises and sacrifices that no one else seemed to notice or understand. But for Emma, he would move mountains. Or at the very least, fix the toilets and heating systems of corporate America, while dreaming of something better. The Apex Technologies building loomed ahead as Jack emerged from the subway station, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sunlight like a beacon of prosperity. He adjusted his worn canvas jacket, suddenly conscious of how out of place he looked among the stream of professionals in tailored suits and designer outfits flowing through the revolving doors. Inside the vast marble lobby, Jack nodded to the security guard who recognized him and waved him through without requiring him to sign in, one of the few perks of being part of the invisible infrastructure that kept the building functioning. He headed straight for the service elevator at the back, bypassing the crowded main elevators where executives and developers stood in tight clusters, engrossed in conversations about market trends and quarterly projections. The maintenance office was located in the basement, a fluorescent-lit space cluttered with tools, spare parts, and the lingering smell of industrial cleaner. Frank, the head of maintenance, was already there, coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Morning, Jack. Got a busy one for you today. Leak on the 32nd floor, thermostat issues on 18, and the executive bathroom on 45 needs a new flush valve." Frank handed him the work order, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Oh, and Catherine Reynolds is apparently freezing in her corner office again. The CEO herself called down twice. So, maybe start there, keep the powers that be happy, you know?" Jack took the work order, scanning the details. Catherine Reynolds, he had heard the name countless times but had never seen the woman in person. As CEO of Apex Technologies, she operated in a stratosphere far removed from the basement-dwelling maintenance crew. "I'll head up to her office first," Jack agreed, gathering the tools he might need. "Any word on the software engineering applications? HR said they'd be available this week." Frank raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement crossing his weathered face. "Still on about that, huh? Look, Jack, no offense, but those tech types upstairs? They're a different breed. All fancy degrees, and Silicon Valley pedigrees. They're not gonna take a maintenance guy seriously, doesn't matter what you did before." Jack felt a flash of irritation, but kept his expression neutral. Frank wasn't wrong. The corporate hierarchy was rigid and unforgiving. But he didn't know about the nights Jack spent hunched over online tutorials, the practice problems he solved while waiting for Emma at piano lessons, the complex algorithms he worked through in his head while fixing leaky faucets. "Just asking," Jack said mildly, closing his toolbox with a decisive click. "Never hurts to try." The elevator ride to the 45th floor, the executive level, was a stark reminder of the world Jack aspired to rejoin. The car was lined with polished wood and soft lighting, a far cry from the utilitarian service elevator he usually took. When the doors opened, he stepped into a hushed environment of plush carpeting and glass-walled offices. The receptionist at the central desk gave him a cursory glance. "Maintenance?" she asked, barely waiting for his nod before pointing down the hallway. "Miss Reynolds' office is at the end, corner suite. She's in a meeting until 9, but you can go in and adjust the thermostat." Jack made his way past offices where executives spoke in low, important tones into phones or stared intently at multiple computer screens. He felt acutely aware of his work clothes and toolbox, of the invisible barrier that separated him from these people who probably made more in a month than he did in a year. Catherine Reynolds' office was impossible to miss, larger than the others, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The space was meticulously organized, minimalist in design, with a large glass desk as its centerpiece. Family photos were conspicuously absent, replaced by awards and recognitions mounted on the walls. Jack located the thermostat and set to work, careful not to disturb anything in the immaculate office. As he worked, his eyes were drawn to the computer screens on the desk, 3 of them, displaying complex data visualizations and what appeared to be code for a new software platform. Jack recognized the programming language immediately. It was one he had been studying recently. Without thinking, he leaned closer, his trained eye spotting a potential issue in the code structure. There was an inefficiency in the algorithm, a small but significant flaw that could cause performance issues down the line. For a moment, he forgot where he was, his mind fully engaged with the elegant problem before him. "Can I help you with something?" The sharp voice cut through his concentration like a knife. Jack straightened immediately, turning to find a woman standing in the doorway. Catherine Reynolds was younger than he had expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and piercing blue eyes that assessed him with cool efficiency. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Jack's rent, and her posture radiated authority and impatience. "I asked if I could help you," she repeated, her tone making it clear that his presence was an unwelcome intrusion. Jack gestured to the thermostat. "Maintenance." There was a complaint about the temperature. He expected her to dismiss him with a nod or wave, as most executives did, but she continued to watch him with a slightly narrowed gaze. "You seemed very interested in my screens," she observed, stepping into the office and closing the door behind her. "Do you make a habit of examining private company data while fixing thermostats?" Jack felt heat rise to his face. "I apologize, Miss Reynolds. I noticed the code and I used to be a software developer. Old habits." He expected anger, perhaps even a complaint to his supervisor, but Catherine's expression shifted slightly to one of curiosity. "A software developer who now fixes thermostats? That's an unusual career trajectory." There was no mockery in her voice, just genuine inquiry. Jack hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Life happens," he said finally. "I needed stability and predictable hours from my daughter, after my wife passed away." Something flickered across Catherine's face, a brief softening, quickly masked. "I see," she said, moving to her desk and setting down the folder she had been carrying. "Well, Mr. Winters," Jack supplied. "Jack Winters." Catherine nodded. "Mr. Winters. Thank you for addressing the temperature issue. That will be all." It was a clear dismissal, and Jack knew better than to linger. He gathered his tools and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. The flaw in the code nagged at him, a professional instinct he couldn't ignore. "Miss Reynolds," he said, turning back. "You might want to have your development team look at the nested loop structure in that authentication module. There's a redundancy that could lead to memory leaks when scaled." Catherine stared at him, surprise evident in her expression. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she picked up her phone. "Claire, cancel my 9 o'clock. Something's come up." She set the phone down and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Mr. Winters. I'd like to hear more about these memory leaks." 30 minutes later, Jack emerged from Catherine Reynolds' office with his head spinning. What had started as a simple observation had turned into an impromptu technical discussion that left the CEO looking at him with new interest. She had listened intently as he explained the potential issues in the code, asking sharp, informed questions that revealed her own technical background. By the end of their conversation, she had invited him to email her a more detailed analysis and, most surprisingly, encouraged him to apply for the upcoming software engineering position. "We need people who can spot problems before they become disasters," she had said, handing him her business card with her direct email address. "Experience comes in many forms, Mr. Winters. Don't let Frank in maintenance tell you otherwise." Jack was still processing the unexpected turn of events as he rode the elevator down to the 32nd floor to deal with the reported leak. He slipped Catherine's business card into his wallet, a small beacon of hope in what had been a long stretch of just getting by. Maybe, just maybe, the path back to the career he loved wasn't as blocked as he had feared. For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where he could use his mind instead of his hands, where he could provide Emma with more than just the basics, where he might reclaim a piece of the life that had slipped away when Sarah got sick. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine punctuated by moments of cautious optimism. Jack submitted his application for the software engineering position, complete with the detailed analysis of the code issues he had spotted in Catherine's office. He received a formal acknowledgement from Human Resources, but nothing more, no indication of whether his unusual application had made it past the initial screening. Each day, he continued his maintenance rounds, fixing the physical infrastructure of the building while his mind worked on complex programming problems. At home, he helped Emma with her homework, attended her piano lessons, and maintained the careful balance of their life together. He didn't tell her about meeting Catherine Reynolds or about the small hope that had taken root inside him. There had been too many disappointments already. He wouldn't add another until he knew for certain that something had changed. On a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after his encounter with Catherine, Jack received an email that made his heart skip a beat. It was from Apex Technologies Human Resources, requesting his presence for an interview for the software engineering position. The interview was scheduled for Friday at 8:30 in the morning, a time that would require him to rearrange his entire schedule, find someone to take Emma to school, and possibly beg Frank for an adjustment to his maintenance duties. But none of that mattered. He had gotten the interview. Against all odds, someone had looked at his application, and decided he was worth talking to. Jack sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the email on his phone screen, a strange mixture of elation and terror washing over him. He had been out of the professional tech world for 3 years, an eternity in software development terms. What if he couldn't answer their questions? What if he had fallen too far behind? He wouldn't let doubt sabotage this opportunity. Jack took a deep breath and began making plans. Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to take Emma to school on Friday morning. Frank grumbled but allowed Jack to start his maintenance shift late. Jack spent every spare moment reviewing programming concepts, practicing coding challenges, and preparing answers to potential interview questions. By Thursday night, he had ironed his one good shirt, polished his dress shoes that hadn't seen use since Sarah's funeral, and rehearsed his elevator pitch until Emma declared she could recite it in her sleep. "You're going to get the job, Dad," she said with the absolute confidence that only children can muster. "And then we can get a bigger apartment. One where I can have a real piano instead of the keyboard." Jack smiled, tucking her into bed. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, sweetheart. One step at a time." But as he kissed her goodnight, he allowed himself to share, just for a moment, in her unwavering belief that things were about to change for the better. Friday morning arrived with a crystalline clarity that seemed to sharpen every detail. Jack woke before his alarm, showered, and dressed with careful precision. He checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror, the shirt collar slightly frayed but clean, his face freshly shaved, his eyes bright with determination despite the nervousness churning in his stomach. Emma was still asleep when he left, having said their goodbyes the night before. Jack left a note on the kitchen counter, reminding her to take her lunch, and wishing her a good day. Then he stepped out into the early morning air, the weight of possibility pressing against his chest like a physical force. The Apex Technologies building seemed different that morning, not the place where he fixed toilets and adjusted thermostats, but a potential new beginning. Jack arrived 20 minutes early, his resume tucked into a folder, his mind cycling through rehearsed answers and technical concepts. He nodded to the security guard with a confidence he didn't entirely feel, and headed for the main elevator bank instead of his usual service elevator. As he waited among the early arrivals, developers and executives starting their day, Jack felt both out of place and strangely at home. This had been his world once. It could be again. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and the waiting crowd began to file in. Jack checked his watch, still 15 minutes until his interview. Plenty of time. He was about to step into the elevator when a commotion at the building entrance caught his attention. A woman was rushing toward the elevator bank, pulling a cart loaded with presentation materials. One of the wheels had caught on the polished floor, causing the cart to tilt dangerously. Papers began to slide off the top, and the woman let out a sound of frustration as she tried to steady the cart while keeping an eye on the closing elevator doors. It was Catherine Reynolds. Jack recognized her immediately, though she looked different from their first meeting, slightly disheveled, clearly running late, a crack in the usually perfect facade. Without thinking, Jack stepped out of the elevator and hurried toward her. "Let me help," he said, steadying the cart with one hand while gathering the fallen papers with the other. Catherine looked up, surprise and relief washing over her face as she recognized him. "Mr. Winters." Thank God. Together, they stabilized the cart and collected the scattered materials presentation boards for what appeared to be a major client meeting. "The board presentation is in 10 minutes, Catherine explained breathlessly, "and my assistant called in sick. The printing company just delivered these, and of course, they're not in the right order." Jack glanced at his watch again. 8:20. 10 minutes until his interview. "I'll help you get these upstairs," he offered, already guiding the cart toward the elevator. Catherine shot him a grateful look. "Thank you." 45th floor, conference room A. The elevator doors closed behind them, and Jack felt a strange sense of déjà vu once again in Catherine Reynolds' orbit through an unexpected circumstance. As they rode up, Catherine quickly sorted through the presentation boards, muttering about sequence numbers and missing sections. Jack helped as best he could, steadying the cart when the elevator stopped to let other passengers on and off. When they reached the 45th floor, Jack could see a group of serious-looking men and women already gathered in the conference room, checking watches and speaking in low, urgent tones. "The investors," Catherine explained tersely. "They're early." She looked genuinely rattled, a stark contrast to the composed CEO he had met weeks earlier. Jack made a split-second decision. "I'll help you set up," he said, already wheeling the cart toward the conference room. "Just tell me where everything goes." Catherine stared at him for a beat, then nodded, gratitude evident in her expression. "The boards need to be arranged on the easels in numeric order. The handouts are in the folders, one for each seat." Jack worked quickly, arranging the presentation materials while Catherine greeted the investors and made apologies for the delay. He could feel time slipping away. 8:25, 8:27, but something kept him from walking away. Perhaps it was the genuine vulnerability he had glimpsed in Catherine's usually controlled demeanor, or perhaps it was simply the instinct to finish what he had started. By 8:29, the room was ready. Catherine gave him a quick nod as she prepared to begin her presentation. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Jack nodded in return and slipped out of the conference room, suddenly remembering his interview with a jolt of panic. He raced to the elevator, punched the button for the 30th floor where Human Resources was located, and checked his watch again. 8:32. Already 2 minutes late. The elevator seemed to move with agonizing slowness, stopping at multiple floors as employees made their way to their offices. By the time Jack reached the 30th floor, it was 8:37. He hurried to the HR reception desk, slightly out of breath. "Jack Winters," he said to the receptionist. "I have an interview at 8:30 for the software engineering position." The receptionist checked her computer, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Mr. Winters, yes. I'm afraid the interview panel has moved on to the next candidate. Our policy is that if you're more than 5 minutes late without notice, the interview is forfeit." Jack felt the floor tilt beneath him. "But I was in the building," he explained urgently. "I was helping Miss Reynolds with her board presentation. There was an emergency." The receptionist's expression remained impassive. "I understand, but the panel's schedule is very tight today. I can see if there might be an opening next week, but I can't promise anything." Jack stood there, the folder containing his resume suddenly heavy in his hand. All the preparation, all the hope, all the careful planning undone in an instant by a simple act of helping someone in need. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had sacrificed his own opportunity to assist the very person who had encouraged him to apply in the first place. "I understand," he said finally, his voice flat. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked back to the elevator, a hollow feeling spreading through his chest. What would he tell Emma? How could he explain that he had thrown away their chance at a better life, because he couldn't say no to someone who needed help? The elevator doors opened, and Jack stepped inside, pressing the button for the basement. Back to maintenance. Back to the life he had been so close to leaving behind. As the elevator descended, Jack's phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Emma has fever. School nurse called. Can you come?" The day, it seemed, was determined to test him on every front. Jack texted back immediately, promising to be there as soon as possible. He would need to tell Frank he had a family emergency, get permission to leave early. More juggling, more compromises. But Emma came first, always had, always would. As the elevator reached the basement, Jack squared his shoulders and stepped out, leaving behind the brief, tantalizing glimpse of what might have been. Frank was surprisingly understanding about the situation with Emma. "Kid's sick, you gotta go. Family first," he said, waving away Jack's apologies. "Just make sure you're here early tomorrow to catch up on the work orders." Jack thanked him and hurried to the service exit, his mind already shifting from professional disappointment to parental concern. He was so preoccupied that he almost collided with someone entering the maintenance area, a tall figure in an impeccably tailored suit. "Catherine," Jack said in surprise, automatically steadying her with his hands. He quickly withdrew them, remembering his place. "Miss Reynolds. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." Catherine Reynolds looked as composed as ever, the morning's momentary fluster completely erased. "Mr. Winters. I was looking for you. I wanted to thank you properly for your help this morning. The presentation went extremely well." Jack nodded, already edging toward the exit. "I'm glad I could help, but if you'll excuse me, my daughter's sick at school. I need to go." Catherine's expression changed immediately to one of concern. "Of course. Is she all right?" The genuine interest in her voice made Jack pause. "Just a fever, according to the school nurse. Probably nothing serious, but you need to be there," Catherine finished for him. "I understand completely." She stepped aside to let him pass, but then called after him. "Mr. Winters. Jack. I heard about what happened with your interview. I'm truly sorry." Jack turned back, a bitter taste in his mouth. "These things happen," he said, attempting a lightness he didn't feel. Catherine studied him for a moment, her blue eyes thoughtful. "They shouldn't. Not when someone misses an opportunity because they were helping the CEO deal with her own emergency." She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a business card different from the one she had given him before. "Call this number at 3 o'clock this afternoon. It's the direct line to our Chief Technology Officer. I've scheduled you for a private interview." Jack stared at the card, then at Catherine, disbelief washing over him. You don't have to do that, he said, even as hope flickered back to life. Catherine shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'm not doing it for you, Mr. Winters. I'm doing it for Apex Technologies. We need problem solvers who can think on their feet. Now go take care of your daughter. And don't be late for this interview. She turned and walked away before Jack could respond, leaving him standing in the basement corridor with the business card in his hand and a strange lightness in his chest. Emma's fever wasn't serious, a minor viral infection. According to the pediatrician Jack took her to immediately after picking her up from school. She was prescribed rest, fluids, and children's ibuprofen for the fever. By 2:30, she was napping on the couch in their apartment, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the business card Catherine had given him. 3 o'clock, a second chance. But Emma was sick, and he couldn't leave her alone. Mrs. Rodriguez had her own doctor's appointment at 3. There was no one else he could call on such short notice. The solution, when it came to him, was so obvious he almost laughed out loud. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card, half expecting to reach a secretary or assistant. Instead, a gruff male voice answered directly. David Morrison, Connecticut O. Jack took a deep breath. Mr. Morrison, this is Jack Winters. I believe Miss Reynolds scheduled an interview with you for 3 o'clock today. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Ah, yes, the maintenance man with the software background. Catherine was quite insistent about this meeting. There was a hint of skepticism in Morrison's tone that Jack chose to ignore. I appreciate the opportunity, sir, but I'm calling to ask if we might conduct the interview remotely. My daughter is homesick from school with a fever, and I don't have anyone who can stay with her right now. Jack held his breath, waiting for the dismissal. Executive-level interviews at companies like Apex weren't typically conducted over the phone, especially not to accommodate a candidate's childcare issues. But to his surprise, Morrison merely grunted. Video call acceptable. I'll need to see your reactions to some technical questions. Jack agreed immediately, relief washing over him. Video call would be perfect. Thank you, sir. At precisely 3 o'clock, Jack sat at his kitchen table, his laptop open, and angled to show only him and the blank wall behind him, not the modest apartment, or his sleeping daughter on the couch just out of frame. He had changed into his interview shirt, but kept on his jeans a strange hybrid of professional and parent on duty. The video call connected, and David Morrison's face filled the screen, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the intense expression of someone who had little patience for incompetence. Mr. Winters, he said by way of greeting. Catherine tells me you spotted a critical issue in our new authentication system just by glancing at the code. Impressive if true. The interview that followed was unlike any Jack had experienced before. There were no soft preliminary questions about his background or career goals. Morrison launched directly into technical interrogation, complex algorithms, system architecture decisions, performance optimization strategies. He shared his screen to show snippets of problematic code, demanding Jack's analysis and solutions in real time. It was grueling, relentless, and strangely exhilarating. For the first time in years, Jack felt his mind fully engaged, operating at the peak of its capacity. 45 minutes into the interview, Emma woke up. Jack heard her soft call from the couch, Dad, and held up a finger to Morrison. I'm sorry, sir. My daughter needs me for a moment. May I have a short break? Morrison nodded, checking his watch. 3 minutes. Jack muted the call and hurried to Emma's side, feeling her forehead and helping her drink some water. I'm on an important call, sweetheart. Can you read quietly for a little while longer? I'll make you soup as soon as I'm done. Emma nodded, reaching for her book. Is it for the computer job? She asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Jack nodded, straightening her blanket. It is. And it's going well, I think. Emma gave him a small smile. You'll get it, Dad, I'm sure. Jack returned to the call with renewed determination. Morrison picked up exactly where they had left off, presenting increasingly complex scenarios and challenges. By the time the interview concluded, nearly 90 minutes had passed. Jack's brain felt both exhausted and electrified. Morrison sat back in his chair, expression unreadable. Well, Mr. Winters, you're certainly not what I expected. Your technical skills are current. More than current in some areas. He paused, tapping a pen against his desk. But I have concerns about your fit. You've been out of the professional development environment for 3 years. Our pace is intense. Our team is young, ambitious. And frankly, the demands of single parenthood could interfere with the commitment we expect. Jack felt a surge of indignation, quickly tempered by the reality that Morrison wasn't saying anything Jack hadn't worried about himself. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your concerns. They're valid. But I would argue that my experience as a single parent has made me more efficient, more focused, and better at prioritizing than I ever was before. I don't have the luxury of wasting time. When I'm working, I'm fully present and productive precisely because my hours are precious." He glanced briefly toward Emma, still reading on the couch. "As for fitting in with a younger team, good code doesn't care how old you are or what your life circumstances might be. Results matter. I can deliver those results." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Winters. Thank you for your time today." The screen went blank before Jack could respond, leaving him staring at his own reflection. Had he been too assertive? Not assertive enough? It was impossible to tell. With a sigh, Jack closed his laptop and turned his attention to Emma, pushing thoughts of the interview aside. "How about that soup now, kiddo?" he asked. Already moving toward the kitchen. Whatever happened with the job, life continued. Dinner needed to be made, medicine administered, homework checked. The wheels kept turning. 2 days later, Emma's fever was gone, and she was back at school. Jack had returned to his maintenance duties, trying not to watch for emails or jump every time his phone buzzed. No news from Apex Technologies. He told himself that was to be expected. Hiring decisions took time, especially for specialized positions. But as days stretched into a week, hope began to fade. Perhaps Morrison's concerns about Jack's fit had outweighed his technical qualifications. Perhaps there had been a more traditional candidate, someone without the complications of single parenthood and a 3-year gap in their resume. On Friday afternoon, Jack was fixing a leaking pipe in the men's room on the 38th floor when his phone vibrated in his pocket. He finished tightening the joint, then dried his hands, and checked the message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Winters, please come to the executive conference room on 4-5 immediately. Catherine Reynolds." Jack stared at the text, a knot forming in his stomach. Why would the CEO summon him personally? Had he done something wrong? Was there an emergency requiring maintenance? He quickly packed up his tools, splashed water on his face to freshen up, and headed for the elevator. As it ascended to the 45th floor, Jack tried to prepare himself for whatever awaited him. The executive conference room was typically used for board meetings and high-level strategy sessions, not the kind of space where maintenance workers were usually welcome. When the elevator doors opened, Jack stepped out and made his way down the now familiar hallway, acutely aware of his work clothes and the faint smell of pipe sealant that clung to him despite his efforts to clean up. The conference room door was closed. Jack knocked tentatively, then entered when a voice called, "Come in." The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Catherine Reynolds sat at the head of the large conference table, with David Morrison to her right. 3 other people in business attire, 2 women, and a man occupied seats around the table. All of them turned to look at Jack as he stood uncertainly in the doorway. "Mr. Winters," Catherine said, her expression neutral. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, join us." Jack moved to the empty chair Catherine indicated, feeling as though he had walked into a scene midway through and had no idea what part he was supposed to play. "I apologize for my appearance," he began, gesturing to his maintenance uniform. "I was in the middle of a repair when I got your message." Catherine waved away his apology. "Your appearance is precisely why we called you here, Mr. Winters. Or rather, the contrast between your current role and what we believe you're capable of." She exchanged a glance with Morrison, who gave a short nod. "Jack," Catherine continued, her tone softening slightly, "after your interview with David, we did some additional research into your background. Your work at Next Gen Solutions before your career pause was exceptional. The recommendation letters from your former colleagues were glowing. And your technical assessment with David placed you in the top 2% of all candidates we've ever evaluated for similar positions." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "In short, Mr. Winters, we would like to offer you the position of Senior Software Engineer on our core development team, effective immediately."